Hi, I'm Frank Sesno, your host on Planet Forward, coming to you from our studios at the George Washington University, right here in the heart of Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., where a lot of talk recently has been about the climate bill, whether there's going to be one, whether politics is going to get in the way, whether energy and climate is something that can be moved through the legislative process and actually be signed by the President of the United States. Recently, we had an extraordinary gathering here, a Planet Forward gathering, where we talked about the future prospects for the climate bill. And one of the questions put to the panel came from a Planet Forward member. It was as follows: at what point does the climate bill get so watered down as to make it actually detrimental to the ultimate goal of solving climate change?
Well, I think that is the critical issue for advocates of moving forward on global warming. It's a tough question. And it's certainly something that we're going to be evaluating all along the way. At the same time, we're trying to make the bill stronger all along the way. But I think when we do that assessment, we have to make a hard-nosed analysis of what will be achieved under legislation and compare that to a hard-nosed analysis of what can realistically be achieved under current law. So we heard from Administrator Jackson. She said, look, we're prepared to implement the law. The Supreme Court told us we have to. We'll do it. But it's not perfect. There are real challenges there. And NRDC is an organization that's had 40 years of experience with the Clean Air Act and have sued EPAs lots of time to get them to implement the law. We recognize that it's a powerful tool, the Clean Air Act. We love it. We'd like to keep it in place and build on it with new legislation. But I think some of my colleagues in the environmental community have a little bit of a rose-tinted glasses view of what you can do under existing law, and they compare that to a real-world bill, and they say, well, this bill has flaws, it's not perfect. Well, you're right. The bill that this Congress or any Congress is going to enact will not be perfect. EPA's ability to implement the Clean Air Act under any administration, no matter how good, will not be perfect. There will be political pressure on them to create loopholes, et cetera. So we have to compare realistic scenarios to each other and decide whether we're better off with legislation or without.
About politics at the end of it, what you're going to get passed.
To me, it's about what pathway reduces emissions fastest.
Yeah, but
that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, so Frank, to dive in here, because I want to wholeheartedly agree with what Dan's saying, is we can, based on 40 years of experience, understand that a regulatory approach will be twice as long, right? Get you half as far as you want to go, and probably at twice the cost. And so the approach that we're all trying to work on together here in legislation is an approach, right, that gets you to shared goals. And remember, our sector, we're backing an 80% reduction by 2050, foursquare in line with the environmental community.
Everybody on board with that goal? Is that the right place to be?
That's what we need
and
to
so now what we're talking about is the pathway to getting there, and it's very important to the environmental community, and I agree with that importance, that this 40-year program have integrity. I mean, that's the key. Will it actually get us to that goal? And so the policy discussion is around that. The people who are raising concerns is about going too far too fast without getting anything meaningful environmentally in return for it. And so that's the conversations around that, and that's why I'm encouraged. But on the other hand, where I get discouraged, cap and trade or market-based regulatory tools were actually the concept of conservative economists, most of whom are Republicans. And it was adopted broadly as an alternative to command and control regulation. So when Republicans are criticizing cap and trade, I always get a little squeamish because it was actually a Republican invention. And so what's really going on here is a concern about caps that are too tight too fast or excessive expense. That really, by the way, at the end of the day, excessive expense is not our issue, the power company's issue. It's consumers. It's poor people. It's people on fixed income for whom energy prices going up and down is a big challenge, and that's a political challenge.
Anna.
And I think on those points are right. And I think on the other side, and what the question is getting at is it kind of strong enough? And I think opponents of what we did in the House from sort of the left really discount the importance of getting started and the history we've seen both in the Clean Air Act that we've had to improve it over time, but that really has achieved some significant goals, and learning the lessons of history. I mean, just look at we went for decades without raising fuel economy standards. Congressional Democrats sent a bill to President Bush who
A bill that President Bush called for.
and then some. Well, we can debate about that, Jim, as we did back then.
State of the Union address and our addiction to oil. Let's have a cafe
Okay,
standard.
all right.
Thank you.
And
There
then
you
it
go.
happened when Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Reid came into power. So there's our history lesson. But cafe increase. We now see the Volt. We now see Nissan Leaf coming out. So we've seen radical change quickly from that and from oil prices.
But the environmentalists will say you've seen radical change, but it's taken you too long. We got 350 parts per million is where we should be. We got 390. We're going to continue. It takes 12 years to turn over the auto fleet. I mean, it's very nice that you're doing this, but if there's a 12-alarm fire raging, and everybody's congratulating one another on ringing the first two alarms, it's a whole lot too little, too late.
Well, and to them, the question is compared to what? So do you want the status quo? Do you want slow-moving regulation?
Well, I just want to jump in here. Two things. I mean, one, I think Administrator Jackson highlighted essentially important is that EPA regulations are going to be subject to lawsuits, which could slow them down even more. But number two, there's a political concern here. I mean, the Obama administration is really supportive of regulations, but it wasn't that long ago that we had the Bush administration, which refused to move forward on the endangerment finding, refused to move forward with regulations through the Clean Air Act. And in 3 more years, in 7 more years, we could have another administration again, and that could reverse this whole course of action. And this is something that is bad for business, because businesses are asking for certainty. They want long term. They want to know what this is going to look like in 10 years, and 20 years, and 30 years. They want to know where the market's going. But also for the international community, they want to know that this is something that's not going to be turned over really quickly. They want to know that the U.S. government, Congress, the administration is behind this, and this is where they're going, because they want to see the U.S. committing to these long-term goals.
And Jim, what's happening, and we have people in the room who work with these constituencies, what's happening while the federal government debates and doesn't do stuff is the state governments, cities, municipalities, businesses are doing it on their own. But in particular, in terms of clean air regulations, many states have taken it on their own and clustered together to do it.
That's true, but that's true of our system. But also, let's take a look. So on a bipartisan basis, lots of different states have pursued a wide variety of different strategies. And at the end of the day, they do the balance on the impact on consumers, the technological feasibility, and then the policy design. And so what we're seeing in Washington now is sort of gathering what the states have done, for example, in the area of renewable power, and trying to now put a federal overlay on that. And that's a good thing, because they hashed it out locally, and now we can nationalize it with greater confidence. But let's be sure we understand. We are in a big place, and I don't like the little spat that just occurred here, because the fact was Bush called for fuel economy standard improvements, and Speaker Pelosi called for it. And the fact was, in a very rapid negotiation that I was part of, we put in place the most stringent fuel economy standards in over a generation in America, and more stringent than what goes on abroad. And it was Republicans and Democrats coming together on common ground on energy security.
So is that going to...
That's the special sauce
is that,
here.
Special sauce. So are we going to have another helping of special sauce this time around? Lindsey Graham has his name to Kerry and Lieberman. What's it going to take, okay? Because the times are different now from when you did this. We just went through health care, as I mentioned. There were no Republicans on board for that, okay? When you passed your House bill, what'd you have, 8, 12?
We had 8 Republicans.
8 Republicans. So, Jim Connaughton, you know the Republicans well. What do you expect is going to happen? What needs to take place for this bill to be passed, for it to have a semblance of bipartisan? Sure.
Well, first, before you get to the Republicans, you have to get through about 15 to 20 Democrats in the Senate, because this issue cuts regionally, especially in big fossil-using states and a lot of the industrial states that have a political mix, which is why you have to find that sweet spot in terms of the combination of a reasonable market-based program for power companies, more domestic oil and gas development that displaces foreign fuel. So you might want to get out of fuel, but it's better to make it in America than to get it from abroad. I mean, you can get a lot of centrist support on that proposition. And then you've got to be sure that the balance you're striking on the technology piece is a balance that's going to help all the different regions of the country. So is there a deal to be had? I am firmly convinced there is one. But in this current environment, and with the calendar as short as it is, it's going to be tough this year. I personally, my company is committed to working hard to get it done this year, but it's going to be tough this year, and that's why that sweet spot matters, and you're seeing a lot of movement from the environmental community and a lot of movement from industry, and that's very important.
So if Lindsey Graham stays aboard, does he attract Let me ask the question differently. What does he need to attract? What does this bill need, in your view, for this to be considered bipartisan?
It needs to have addressed a number of legitimate criticisms. One is prior policy designs looked like a tax. The federal government collected the money and handed it back out. Now, if you can do a cap and trade the way it's supposed to be done, where the government doesn't touch the money, that takes away a very powerful argument that this thing's a tax. That's one. And then two, if there's reasonable controls on runaway costs. So everybody understands this is going to cost something. Actually, it's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars initially, up to a greater amount. But what people are concerned is runaway costs. You know, electricity price spikes of 20, 30, 50%. Well, you know, consumers don't like that.
Is that what you think is going to be involved with this?
No, that's what you can protect against. I don't think it's going to cost that much. I'm in the camp, I think innovation is going to occur and efficient choices will occur. So I'm not as afraid of that as many understandably are. So if we can put a reasonable lid on runaway costs, we got plenty of headroom to do clean energy investments that will meet the goals.
Dan, where are the costs in this?
Well, I think we end up saving money out of this bill.
Consumers save money?
So that means Dan's not worried then about a control on runaway costs.
You know, I think we can have reasonable price collar, whatever they're going to call it, cost containment measures that provide certainty that there's not going to be spikes. Okay, so people worried about spikes. You get market fluctuations. So I think we can protect against spikes, but we have to make sure that the cap itself that's driving down emissions maintains its integrity so that you actually achieve your environmental goals. So that's a balance. I think we can achieve that. I think the House bill did achieve that, actually. I think the Senate bill will do it a little differently, and it can be improved on, so we'll do that. But I think the point about savings is important because a lot of the opponents here will focus on prices. And you know, consumers pay bills. They pay electricity bills monthly to Jim's company. They pay, you know, for gasoline. People focus on what it says on the pump, but if you're driving a more efficient vehicle so that you're filling up less, the price of the pump could be a little bit higher. You can end up saving money. So if we drive the right innovations so that people's homes are more efficient and their cars are using less gasoline, then they will actually save money while we reduce pollution.
What other Republican senators will sign on to this, from what we know that's emerging now?
Well, look, I think the thing to look at is which Republicans have supported the concept of limiting carbon pollution, and there's about half a dozen. So you've got Dick Lugar sponsored bills in the past. Collins and Snow of Maine have both sponsored bills in the past. John McCain has sponsored a bill in the past, and Lindsey Graham has a bill now. So I think there's a lot of potential.
In Massachusetts, Senator Brown, when he was in the state, supported Massachusetts state program. The state of Massachusetts has a lot to benefit from our clean technology innovation at all of our universities and startup companies.
You see a bipartisan plan emerging here, or is this so much wishful thinking?
Well, it has to be bipartisan. There's no question, and there's no plan unless it's bipartisan. I think Jim highlighted this really well, and there's a lot of regional concerns here. There's a number of Democrats who need to be convinced as well. So unless there's support from a few Republicans, this bill is not going to go anywhere.
And by the way, and that becomes a bit of a dance because you have Lindsey Graham and a couple Republicans. They need to pick up a few more. If they do that, then there's 5 or 6 Democrats that will say, well, if we've got some Republicans that will do it, then we'll join too. Then all of a sudden the numbers can expand. But this is a very delicate political dance. It is a negotiation because there are very significant cost issues at stake here. And so it's going to require some deft handling, which has been challenging in this current environment.
And I think we can't lose sight of this year. We are emerging from a global recession. We're already seeing
That's what's behind that poll that I was citing. People are far more worried about their jobs and their economy and their bank books at the moment than they are the
right. And that's
the
why
energy
our
around
bill
them.
is an energy and climate bill. It's a comprehensive attempt to address the problem. And cap and trade is one portion of it, but there's a whole complement of other things that get at reducing foreign oil, improving our domestic production of energy, and competing in the global marketplace to build energy technology.
It was a terrific, provocative conversation we had here, one that was not altogether encouraging about whether the United States Congress and the administration could find that particular path to climate and energy legislation. We see it every day play out in the headlines. But we'd like to know what you think, how you would weigh in on this topic, the message you would send to the Congress, to the administration, or share with your citizens in this country and beyond. The place to do that, of course, is planetforward.org. We'd love to hear from you.